Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're just going to ask you this, give us this information that's on this sheet so we can have it on the videotape. So Nick will go ahead and ask you.
Can you say your first name and last name?
My first name, Bernice, and the last is Hinshaw. My maiden name, do you want? The name?
No, that's not necessary.
Okay. Hinshaw.
Where were you born at?
Stevenson County in northern Illinois, just about 2 miles from the Wisconsin-Illinois state line. Dakota would be the first little town.
What date were you born on?
August the 22nd, 1920.
What branch of service were you in?
The Army Nurse Corps, the initials ANC.
What was your highest rank?
First lieutenant.
What dates did you enlist?
Beg your pardon?
What dates did you enlist?
What date did I enlist? I went in April of 43 and was discharged the last of February, 46.
Okay.
Is that?
That's what we need. Okay, so
What
now
you
we'll
wanted?
get to the questions.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
We enlisted. The two of us were classmates in nursing, and we made out the application for the Navy, and the Navy didn't accept us because our vision wasn't perfect. So they automatically, this was war, they transferred it to the Army, and we were accepted there.
Where were you living at the time?
At the time, I was at a school of nursing in Freeport, Illinois.
Why did you join?
Why did I join? Oh, I think the reason is, like many young people did, they'd only seen Illinois and Wisconsin. They didn't travel then. They were confined to work and things of that sort. And they wanted to see the world. That was major in the men's minds, and I'm sure it was the girls too. This would be a chance to see the world and help too. But getting out of the two states and knowing what was around you was important to them.
Why did you pick the service branch you joined?
Well, I think I've pretty well explained that.
Do you recall your first days in service?
Beg your pardon?
Do you recall your first days in service?
Oh, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Do you recall the first days of service?
Oh, yes, I certainly did. The ride down from Chicago on the IC train to Jackson, Mississippi was very interesting. And that night we slept on the Pullman, and they'd been discontinued some years ago. One of us slept up above in the upper deck and the other down below. And we got down to southern Illinois, where the Mississippi and the Ohio and those big rivers join. Oh, we were so amazed. I don't think we slept a wink that night. We had to see all that water. It just looked like an ocean to us. And then we continued on to Jackson, Mississippi, and then got the Pokey train from there on down to Hattiesburg, then to Camp Shelby. But that train between Jackson and Hattiesburg, oh, it made so many stops, you know, and the people were aggravated and wanted to get going. But really, southern Mississippi, southern states are vastly different than the northern states. And it was like going to another country. And the customs were different. The terrain was different. The soil itself was different. It was just bright red. And the people. It was 80 years after the Civil War. And it was 20 years before Selma, Alabama. And the Jim Crow laws were still in effect. I don't know if you know what those were or not. You don't? Oh, my. You couldn't sit in a theater with your own wife if you were a black and white couple.
Oh, okay.
That type of thing. Everywhere you went. The buses, in the theater, in the church, everywhere. You strictly observed those. You would have had different restrooms. Well, naturally you would, but it was black and white restrooms in addition to male and female. And, they poked fun at people that didn't observe those rules. You were just ridiculed, called a damn Yankee, because we made such miserable mistakes in their area. And that was so hard to get used to. And the vegetation was different. The coldest month was November, and it had this, today reminds me of it, it had this damp chill in the air. And then about the time that January rolled around, the japonicas were starting to bloom, and they were a big, beautiful flower, a southern flower. And it seemed like from then on, it didn't take long until we were into hot weather, like April. And it was quite damp there in the summer, too. And it got very hot. And so when we wrote a letter home, they'd put a bath towel under your arm for the perspiration to drip down on. And am I going too much in detail?
You're doing fine.
I don't know how much time you want to spend with this kind of thing. Well, anyway, they put us in a barrack with girls from Minnesota and from Michigan, Illinois. And then we had this one girl from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And somehow we were quite compatible, and it was real nice. And, but it was so different. I had to go to my room and shed some tears, and I thought, oh, what have I gotten myself into? And another thing I did was to go to the library. They had a good one there at the hospital. And look up the history of Mississippi. Where had it been, and where might it be going? And at that time, it was the poorest state in the Union. And let's see, what else can we say for the beginning there? The hospital itself was a station hospital, which means they took care of emergency needs. And the next would be the hospitals that were better equipped, and they could take care of the next stage of illness or hurt. And they were sent out of Camp Shelby for that. And Camp Shelby itself was just huge. There was about 90,000 people there, about the size of our Rockford, Illinois. And it was the civilians in the area that were working, and then all the military personnel. And you had 3 big infantry divisions trained there. And they had everything set up just like it would be on the battlegrounds overseas. then let's see, it was infantry was basically what it was. And then you had hospital units set up there, just like they would be after they went overseas. And you had the tank destroyers, the military police, and on, smaller groups. We had the 442nd Battalion, and they were from Hawaii, and they were full-blooded Japanese. What are you, by the way?
I'm Chinese.
You're Chinese. I taught myself during the war to tell the Japanese from the Chinese, but I did it from the back of the head. Something about the back of the head. I could tell quite well what nationality the boys were. Well, we had people just from all over. This 442nd, they came from Hawaii, and they were the first generation to fight in the war, and shortly afterwards, Hawaii became a state, Alaska became a state, but until that time, we had 48 states, and Rhode Island, oh, there was a popular song, Poor Little Rhode Island, the smallest of the 48. And shortly after that, oh, they would just sing it and blast it out, you know. And then shortly after that, though, I believe it was 1950, those other two became states. But getting back to the 442nd, their people were in Hawaii. That would be their immediate relatives, you know, their parents and their grandparents. Like the Revolutionary War way back when, we fought that war against parents and grandchildren and that type of thing. So they had to have a way of identifying the two differences. You couldn't dress them alike. So they sent this 442nd to Italy. And well, that's the only way they had to identify the two groups, and kept them separate. They didn't dare put them out in the South Pacific on the battleships or, after Pearl Harbor. They didn't dare put them out because they shortly became American citizens. And I often wondered how they could manage the language skills that they did with people coming in from all different European countries. I think it was just wonderful the way they did. But the Japanese were very good at figuring out the different codes of different languages, and they just about gave us a merry chase with it. Then we got one that stumped them, and that was our American Indians. I've forgotten the tribe, but they used their skill, and they deciphered that one. I mean, that one had them stumped. And the rest of them, they were able to decipher and do what they wanted to do. I just think it was marvelous the way they did. And then they kept changing their airplanes, you know, so they'd be a jump ahead of the other ones in all the ways that they possibly could. And it seemed like it was a race, airplanes and all the different equipment that was used, a race between the Allies and the Axis. Let's see.
You can ask her another question here. Let's see. Yeah.
How did you stay in touch with your family?
Oh, by telephone and by V-mail was a big thing. They had to keep the packages small. They had to keep the weight down. So the V-mail was, maybe about 6 inches tall. It was a picture of a letter. It was actually what it was. And that was used a great deal. And of course your stamp was the wings of the eagle, our national bird. And it was in the shape of a V for victory. And that was on these stamps. Oh, our stamps were sent free, but when our people had to send them back, they put the full postage on that was used. Okay, another one?
What was the food like?
Food? In Camp Shelby, it was pretty much the southern food. You had the natives, civilian people in the area, good cooks, came in and did the cooking. And you had the hominy, the grits, we frowned on it in the north, but they enjoyed that kind of cooking very much. But otherwise, it was pretty much the same, except you get this bits of southern food now and then. And then I remember the day that the war was over. They watched very carefully the men that worked in the mess hall. They were afraid that they would put ground glass into the food. Do I need to be careful what I'm saying here? Yeah, it's been a long time ago. I remember there was, I believe it was Germans at the time. We had German prisoners of war there. They were watched very carefully that day, just in case something like that might have happened. But for the most part, the food was good. Mm-hmm.
How did people entertain themselves?
Oh, you kept your ear to the radio to get the most recent news, and also the casualty list in the papers was just tremendous. And the main newspaper that came in, there was two out of New Orleans, and one was Times-Picayune, and that would be compared to our the Chicago Tribune, a big paper. And then the other one was Times New Orleans, I believe was the name of it. Those were the two main papers that we got. And, well, we did a lot of talking, you know, our group, exchange ideas, exchange incidents that happened on the floors that day, the medications that were used, and all that, you know, just talk among your co-workers. There was a lot of that, and I don't think it's too different than what it would be today, except you always brought in the war news. And then you're back home, things were rationed. And if I was to my own home, I could get that paper. But it was, the tires were rationed. The gasoline was rationed. The sugar that you used in your home was rationed. And the people, there was a oneness about the people. Get this war done. It was so different than other wars since then. And the people just had that feeling of the desire to win and get it done and get back to work, get on with our lives.
What what was your main responsibility while you were in the service? What did you do? Walk us through one of your days.
Oh, there were so many things that we got into, partly because of the location where we were. I tell you one thing that was so interesting was the people from Appalachia, the Appalachia area. The young men were sent to Camp Shelby, some with no formal education, some with very little. And when they came to us, they had childhood diseases, and it was so unusual, we thought. It was mumps, it was scarlet fever, it was pneumonia, it was, all that type thing that a lot of kids had when they were still children. Well, these people lived up in this mountainous area, and originally they came from Ireland, and they were just a poor set of people. And while there were patients in this big ward, in these big wards, they were going to school. The military set up a special school. They were to finish 3rd grade before they could go into the infantry. And that's what they were brought in the service for. They were good marksmen. Now today, you need other skills other than that. They wouldn't get anywhere today with that kind of an education. I remember one boy, I think he was about 16, I don't know how. No, he wasn't. When he was 16, he was married. He had the responsibility of a full-grown man. But he sat up in his bed, and he had his little primer. This is a flag, or this is a tent, things like that. And I had the picture of the flag, the picture of the tent, and he says, I've just got to stay with this. I've got to learn this work and get on with my life. And he did a good job. He had the desire. And then close to him, in another bed, would be a boy that, my dad didn't have an education. He didn't need one. He got through life all right. I don't need an education either. And that was his attitude. And you had that throughout. And they were gambling. And they were getting gypped. Excuse my expression. They were being beaten. You know what I mean. And so we took their money from them and put it in the registrar's office until they were dismissed from the hospital. And we wrote their letters, and you wondered who was on the other end that could read them. Then at the end of the war, the United States, that paper that they published, the military did, they summarized the number of people that were sent home because they couldn't pass 3rd grade at a given amount of time. And I wish I'd have kept that paper. I gave it to a friend. But it summarized that whole operation and the number of people that were sent home. And that was so interesting and so sad. If you told me about it, I wouldn't have believed it. But I had to see it.
Yeah. Let's see.
What am I?
Yeah.
Did you work or go back to school after the war?
After the war, I did a little both. We finished our nursing before we went in. And a lot of the men went in the military, and then they would pick it up in a branch that they were working in. Like my husband, he was talented with electricity. and but he didn't have the opportunity of going to school to develop his skills. So he was stationed somewhere in California during the war, and he had the opportunity of going to a school and enlarging his skills. But we completed our training, and we went back to Chicago to take our state board examinations. Then we had to wait 3 months to get the results of them. And then in 1943, we went into service. Let's see.
How about when you got out? What did you do when you...
Oh, right. I knew there was more to that question. The first year, I went back to Chicago, and there was an Illinois research. There's another name for it, and I can't think of it. But it's associated with the University of Illinois. And it did just that. It researched and education. And I spent a year there, a very valuable year. They had diseases crop up that the doctors I didn't know anything about. You know, you had the tropical diseases when they got into North Africa, when the men did. They had tropical diseases that malaria was a bad one, but there was other ones too. And our doctors just had to buckle down and learn how to take care of those. And another thing we were doing in the civilian hospitals was keeping them in bed too long. And it worked all right with the civilian hospitals, like especially in obstetrics. You know, they kept them in 2 weeks after they had a baby. Today they're up doing laundry practically. It's a different thing. But they found that the men were being weakened by staying in bed so long. And so they had to rethink some of our methods and then add to. It was just a big turning time for our medical profession.
So did you help out with this research? Is that what you did after the service?
Yeah, I did. No, I didn't with the actual, but the patients came there, and they became almost residents, but they couldn't get in that hospital unless they had something unusual, something that needed to be studied. And then at night, when we worked night duty, you'd hear the truck pull in with a kind of big cage on the back, and they took the stray dogs off the street and used them. I know people today would just pull their hair out the way they used animals, but it was necessary to get on with some diseases and things. And they used monkeys somehow in the determining whether a woman was pregnant or not. I can't tell you how it was done. It's been so long ago, and they did it such a short time.
Tell me what that last day was like when you found out that your service was ending. How did you feel that day?
When it was ended?
Yes.
Oh, I had mixed feelings. It was a terrible adjustment, to tell you the truth. We came from a farm community. General farming is what they did, mostly dairy, and it was that. And our people, my people, were opposed to school. I mean, you had to fight to get school. It was, they wanted to keep that area as much like Germany as possible. And anything outside of our little locale, they didn't want anything to do with it. And when you got out in the military like this, you found you needed to cope with other people. You needed to understand their ideas and their problems and all that. And that was the thing that my people didn't want to have happen. They didn't want them to get out of our area because those things would happen. So they just clashed. In a way, I knew it was going to be like that. They were loving parents. And had a wonderful work ethic. But they didn't want you to go any further. And even the sports in school, they thought that was the biggest waste of time there ever was. They'd have to go home and milk the cows and help on the farm and do all those kinds of things. But, in fact, I didn't fit in very well at home. They didn't understand what I was trying to tell them. They didn't know anything about the war, except the little bit they read in the papers. And I just clashed with my people, but I did it as quietly and lovingly as I possibly could. And then I got one of my friends that I had been in school with all through grade school and high school. And she introduced me to just a wonderful guy. And we were married and had a real good marriage. But no, for me, it was very difficult that, and each one went to a different culture when they went home, Each state was a little bit different. Oh, and the speech. If I'm keeping you too long, just say it.
I have one more question to ask, and I think we'll be done. If you can recall one story that you always remember about being in the service, what would that be? What could you tell us? If somebody said, tell me a story that sticks out in your mind.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Yeah, a lot of them.
It's been so many.
What are your favorite, or maybe something that's
that one
funny?
Of Appalachia was so extremely different than we know. Of course, we were in depression in those years, but we did know how to read and write. I don't know. We had the German prisoners of war. They came into Camp Shelby and they had to be kept busy. So they built an artificial lake, built or created it or whatever you want to call it. This artificial lake. And they were interesting. And then when the men came back from North Africa, they built a special hospital for them in Jackson, Mississippi. And about 5 or 6 of us were sent from Camp Shelby on detached service, they called it. And it was just about 6-8 weeks while they were returning that you got them situated in this hospital. And their care was, a degree higher than they would get in Camp Shelby. And then the things that happened to them when they were in North Africa, the desert. And, there was so much to tell. We worked a long time during the day, and then you stayed on after work hours, or you should have been off duty, and talked some more. Let's see, what else?
So is there anybody that you still stay in touch with at all, or write letters to?
Many of them are gone.
Yeah.
I'm 86.
Yeah.
Many of them are gone. My dearest friend, the one that I went into Camp Shelby with, has been gone about 12 years. So you make new friends or keep the old.
Sure.
One is silver and the other gold. And, land.
Okay. I think that covers everything.
Uh-huh.
I think if there's anything that we missed. I think that's it.
Mm-hmm.
I think you explained it very well, and
Mm-hmm.
I congratulate you for being able to remember.
We were kept quiet
Oh, sure.
because they wouldn't be understood.